The Closet Wall True Home Invasion Horror Story. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, but you couldn't prove it? Like no matter how safe your space felt, some part of you just knew something was off? This story isn't about ghosts or anything supernatural. It's about the moment I realized someone had been living just a few feet from where I slept, and breathing, right behind my closet wall. I was a 17-year-old girl, still living at home with my mom in a small older house in Vermont. Just the two of us. The house was built in the 1940s. Real creaky floors, single pane windows, those old radiator heaters that clanked in the winter. I was used to weird little noises. One night, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., I was up late studying. My room was at the end of the hall, second floor, right above the garage. I had headphones on, but took them off to give my ears a break, and that's when I noticed it. A faint, soft sound. Like breathing. It wasn't loud, just this slow, rhythmic inhale and exhale. At first I assumed it was the pipes, or maybe even the wind coming through the vent behind my closet. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized it didn't sound like wind. It was too controlled, too deliberate, and it wasn't coming from the vent. It was coming from behind the closet wall. I stood there for maybe a full minute, just listening, frozen. My first thought was maybe it's an animal, a raccoon or squirrel or something. I slowly opened the closet door. The sound didn't change, just clothes, shoes, some storage bins. No movement, but the wall at the back felt colder. I pressed my ear against it. I swear to God it sounded like someone was holding their breath on the other side. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning I told my mom. She laughed it off, said it was probably air in the pipes or just a draft. But about a week later she was in my room folding laundry, and suddenly she called out, "Do you hear that?" I looked up. She was staring at the closet. Sure enough, there it was again. That low, steady breathing. This time she didn't laugh. She knocked on the wall. The sound stopped. We called a pest control guy first, thinking maybe something had gotten stuck in the wall. But when he came and inspected, he said there was no sign of animals. No damage, no droppings, nothing. So my mom called a contractor to take a closer look. That's when things got disturbing. The guy came 2 days later with a small inspection camera and tools. He started tapping around the closet wall, then stopped and looked confused. "This section sounds hollow," he said. He drilled a small hole just big enough for his camera. What he saw inside made my stomach drop. It wasn't a crawl space. It wasn't ductwork or anything like that. It was a hollowed-out compartment, maybe 4 feet deep, 6 feet tall. Someone had carved out a section of the wall between the studs. Inside we found food wrappers, empty water bottles, an old blanket, and a notebook. A journal. The pages were filthy, smudged, most of it unreadable. Some things were still legible. It was written in this cramped, messy handwriting, mostly random notes and observations. Here's what I remember word for word. She talks to herself when she thinks no one's listening. She takes her socks off before bed. She leaves her closet door open now. That last line was dated 3 days before we found out someone had been living inside our wall. Watching me, listening to me. The police came, of course. They found more evidence, fingerprints, even some old food stashed in the attic. But no one was ever caught. To this day, we don't know how long he'd been living there or how he got in. We changed the locks, got motion lights. My mom even installed cameras. But none of that really helped me sleep again in that room, because no matter how safe it seemed, I kept asking myself the same question. How long was he behind the wall before I noticed the breathing? I don't live there anymore. But sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night, and for a split second I swear I hear it again. Just breathing, behind the wall. If this story gave you chills, you'll want to hear what's coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Behind the panel, the breathing in my wall, true horror story. Have you ever heard breathing coming from behind your bedroom wall? Not the house settling, not pipes, breathing, like someone lying just inches away, hidden. That's what started it all for me. I was a 28-year-old guy. I had just moved into a duplex outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Nothing special. Cheap rent, quiet street, and close to where I worked night shifts at a medical distribution center. The first few weeks were uneventful. I'd get home around 4:30 in the morning, eat something, then crash hard and sleep until late afternoon. But I remember the first time I noticed something weird. It was a Thursday. I was half asleep lying on my side when I heard this faint wheezing. It sounded like someone with bad lungs. Just this slow, drawn-out inhale and exhale. I sat up and listened. It was coming from the wall behind my bed, the wall that backed up to the other side of the duplex, which I knew was unoccupied. I told myself it was probably just pipes, or maybe some kind of air leak, and I didn't think much of it. But it kept happening, always when I was trying to fall asleep. Same wall, same sound, never loud, just persistent. After about a week, it started getting to me. I even recorded it on my phone, but every time I played it back, it was too faint to make out. That almost made it worse, like it was only for me to hear. One afternoon, totally sleep-deprived and irritated, I sat up in bed and banged on the wall with my fist. Just once, and immediately, the sound stopped, not faded, not slowly disappeared. It just stopped, like someone had been holding their breath, or had been caught. That was the first time I got that icy feeling in my spine, the kind you can't rationalize away. The next couple of days, I slept on the couch in the living room. I told myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I didn't want to be in that room. And even out on the couch, I swear I'd wake up feeling like someone had been watching me. Then one night I got off work early. My co-worker covered the second half of my shift because I wasn't feeling great. I pulled into my driveway a little after 1 in the morning, and as I walked up to the house, I noticed something I hadn't really paid attention to before. There was a basement window on the side of the duplex just barely visible behind some overgrown bushes. I had never looked inside, but I decided to go check it out. Just curiosity, I guess. The window was dusty and streaked, but I could see shelves, a washer and dryer, and to the right, this dark square set into the wall, like a wooden panel. I opened the window and crawled in. Inside, I found the light switch and started scanning the basement. Sure enough, the panel was there. It looked like a maintenance hatch or maybe some old access point. The wood was warped and didn't look like it had been opened in years, but when I pressed my hand against it, it moved. Not easily, but just enough. So I pulled it open, and behind it was a narrow space. Not quite a crawl space, not quite a room. Just a gap, maybe 3 feet wide, running along the inner wall. It smelled musty, like old sweat and candle wax. I used the flashlight on my phone to look inside, and inside I saw a sleeping bag, some food wrappers, empty water bottles. And worst of all, taped to the inside of the wall was Polaroid photos of me, sleeping in my bed, my whole body locked up. It felt like my heart actually stopped. The photos were angled from above, like they had been taken through a vent or from a crawl space in the ceiling. I stared at them, trying to remember what I was wearing in the photos, trying to remember when they were taken. I backed out of the space and shut the panel, then went back out the window. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on the couch with a kitchen knife, jumping at every creak and hum the house made. The next day I called the landlord. He swore up and down that no one had keys to the basement except him, and that the other side of the duplex had been vacant for almost a year. I asked if the wall between units was hollow or had been renovated. He said no, just drywall and insulation. I didn't even bother asking him to check the panel. I didn't sleep for a week. I moved out that week. I didn't even try to get my security deposit back. I left the mattress, the bed frame, everything. I still don't know how long that person was in there, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and every time I try to fall asleep in my new place, I still find myself listening for breathing just behind the wall. If this story gave you chills, you'll want to hear what's coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The Man in Apartment 3B, True Creepy Neighbor Story. Have you ever lived next to someone who just gave you a weird feeling? Not because they were loud or rude or even creepy in the usual way, but because everything about them felt just off, like something was wrong and you couldn't explain why? This is the story of the neighbor I wish I reported sooner, because by the time I realized what he was doing, it was already too late. I was 24 when I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet building just outside Boston. Nothing fancy, but it was cheap, safe, and close to my job at the time. The building had 8 units, mostly students or older tenants. Everyone kept to themselves. Except for the guy in 3B, I never got his name. He looked mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Thin, pale, always wore a gray hoodie, even in the middle of summer. His blinds were always shut, and I never saw him carrying groceries, taking out trash. Nothing. Just silence. He lived right across from me, and every time I walked by, I could feel him watching through the peephole. I'd glance over and sometimes hear a shift, like someone stepping back just as I passed. At first, I brushed it off. Some people are just weird, right? But then little things started happening. I'd come home and notice my doormat slightly moved. My door lock looked like someone had tried to use something to get in, but didn't quite get in. Once my mailbox was wide open, but nothing was missing. Still, I told myself I was just being paranoid. Until one night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps right outside my door. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The walls were thin, and my door opened right to the hallway so I could hear every step. Then there was this soft scraping sound, like someone dragging their fingers across the metal of my door. I crept to the peephole. Nobody was there. But when I opened the door the next morning, someone had taped a piece of paper to it. Just a plain white sheet, with a smiley face drawn on it. No note, no explanation. I took it down and laughed it off. Some kind of dumb prank, maybe. But deep down it started to mess with me. I purchased a security camera and pointed it to cover my front door. I didn't even care if it made the hallway look worse. I just needed peace of mind. The next few nights were quiet, until the 4th night. I checked the footage in the morning out of habit, and I saw him. At 3:17 a.m., the man from 3B walked up to my door. He stood there for 6 full minutes, not moving, just staring. Then, without a word, he leaned in slowly and licked the peephole. I nearly dropped my phone. I ran straight to the landlord. He didn't even look surprised. He just sighed and said, "Yeah, that guy's a little strange. Keeps to himself." That was it. So I called the police. But they said unless he threatened me or tried to break in, there wasn't much they could do. They offered to do a wellness check on him. But that only seemed to make things worse, because 2 nights later I woke up again, this time to the click of my front doorknob. It wasn't just being touched, it was turning, slowly. I didn't move. I stayed frozen in bed, clutching my phone under the covers, already dialing 911. The lock held, but then I heard something that still makes my skin crawl. A whisper, muffled through the door, but clear enough. "Why won't you let me in?" I stayed silent. He whispered it again, quieter this time. "Just let me in." Then, nothing. Just footsteps, retreating. By the time the cops got there, he was back in his apartment. They questioned him, but again, nothing they could do. No forced entry, no direct threat. But the final straw came 3 days later. I came home from work. The door was locked. Everything looked normal until I stepped into the bedroom. All my clothes were gone, every drawer pulled out, and in the middle of my bed was a Polaroid. It was a photo of me, sleeping, taken from inside my room. I packed a bag of the few items he didn't take and left that night. Slept at a friend's, then moved out within a week. I never went back, never heard what happened to the guy in 3B. I checked the building's online reviews a few months later. Someone had posted, "Be careful if you move here. There's a man in 3B who watches you through your peephole." That post was dated 2 years before I ever moved in, and I still wonder how many photos he took of me before I found that one. If this gave you chills, you owe it to yourself to hit that subscribe button. Tenant in the wall, the true horror hiding next door. Have you ever joked about something creepy only to realize too late it wasn't a joke at all? My brother used to laugh about the man in the wall until we found out he wasn't imagining it. This happened to my older brother Mark when he was 24. He was living in a rough part of Chicago, renting a tiny studio in one of those run-down pre-war buildings with creaky floors and paper-thin walls. The place was cheap, way too cheap, but you know he was trying to save money while finishing up his degree, and he figured he could deal with the noise and the occasional sketchy neighbor. At first it was just little stuff. He told me about weird sounds at night, shuffling, scratching what sounded like soft thumps behind the walls near his bed. He thought maybe it was rats or old pipes or the neighbors moving around. Typical old building stuff. But one night he called me a little freaked out. He said he could hear breathing coming from behind the wall where his bed was pushed up. He even made a joke about it, like, maybe there's some old dude living in there. The wall guy. I laughed it off too. But then he said, dead serious, "No, I mean it. It sounds like someone sleeping back there." I still didn't think much of it until I visited him that weekend. I crashed on a little air mattress in the corner of his room right by the radiator. That night around 2 or 3 a.m., I heard it too. It wasn't rats, it wasn't pipes. It was breathing. Deep, wheezy, rhythmic inhale, then exhale. It was slow, almost like snoring, but it didn't feel like it was coming through the vents or the floor. It felt like it was inside the wall right behind his bed, and it stopped completely when we moved or made any noise. The next morning, we pulled the bed away from the wall. There was nothing unusual, just chipped paint and an old radiator pipe. But the noise came back again the next night. He reported it to the building manager, who sent a maintenance guy to check the plumbing. Of course, he didn't find anything wrong and told Mark to just buy a white noise machine. So a few days later, Mark texted me saying something messed up had happened. He'd come home from work and noticed his fridge door was slightly open. Nothing inside was missing, but it looked like someone had rummaged through it. The weirdest part? His toothpaste and deodorant had been moved to the opposite side of the bathroom sink. It was too specific to be random, but there was no sign of forced entry. That's when he got really paranoid. He started stacking furniture against his door at night, purchased a door alarm, even screwed his window shut from the inside. But the breathing continued. Eventually he insisted the building send someone to inspect the wall. They finally agreed mostly to shut him up. The maintenance guy came with a crowbar to open up the wall, expecting to find a broken pipe or maybe rodent nests. What they found instead was horrifying. Behind the wall, where the headboard had been resting, there was an old vertical shaft, maybe part of a decommissioned dumbwaiter system or maintenance tunnel. It had been sealed on the bottom, but had just enough space for someone to lie or sleep in. Inside the shaft, they found a dirty bedroll, empty fast food wrappers, an old backpack, and a burner phone. That phone had photos of the apartment, Mark's apartment, from inside it. There were pictures of him sleeping, dozens of them, different angles, different nights. One of them showed him lying on the couch with an arm hanging off the edge taken from floor level, like someone was under the furniture. It turns out a former tenant who was evicted almost a year earlier never actually left. He had somehow gotten access to the building's maintenance areas and was living and sleeping in the walls. The shaft was connected to a utility closet on the first floor, which had a busted lock, which allowed him access to hallways and apartments on that floor. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. The landlord admitted that several of the apartments, including Mark's, hadn't had their locks changed in over a decade. They used old master keys to make new keys that hadn't been returned to issue to new tenants, which means that man could have entered Mark's apartments at any time. He didn't need to break in. He already had a key. And based on the things moved around in Mark's unit and the pictures, the guy had been coming in and out of Mark's apartment at will, even as Mark slept. Mark moved out the same week, packed everything he owned into a U-Haul and never looked back. To this day, he still checks behind every wall he can, taps them to listen for hollow spaces, refuses to live on the first floor. And the scariest part? We never found out how long that guy had been there, or how many nights Mark had slept just inches away from him, separated by nothing but a thin, rotting wall. If this gave you chills, you owe it to yourself to hit that subscribe button.